Gentleman yields back. I now recognize the distinguished gentleman from Minnesota, Mr. Phillips, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I have to start by saying that I share my colleagues' grave concerns, dismay, disgust, and even heartbreak over our country's recent actions. The world notices how we treat our allies, and I believe that we have compromised our ability to affect our foreign policy over the years to come because of it. We've heard from a lot of people in my district, a lot of warriors. One of them wrote, quote, "At the core of this issue are our American values: trust, commitment, sanctity of human life, human dignity. When we make commitments, especially when we make them with the vulnerable, with the promise that we will prevent harm, we should keep those commitments." End quote. I'm afraid this is an example that will be used at West Point and war colleges. I know you're a graduate, Mr. Palmer, across the country as an example of how not to conduct ethical and strategic decision-making. With that in mind, Ambassador Jeffrey, in your opening remarks and your testimony, you shared our strategy, our foreign policy towards Syria. Do you believe that what you shared in your testimony is congruent with the actions of President Trump in recent weeks?
Considering the fact that President Trump a few minutes ago announced that we would be keeping some troops on in northeast Syria, it's a bit more congruent now than it was a few minutes ago.
Okay, so it was incongruent until a few minutes ago.
I actually didn't say that. I said it's even more congruent now.
Oh, even more congruent now. Mr. Palmer, how do you feel? Congruent or incongruent?
I'm going to go with congruent, Congressman.
Interesting. Do you believe, this question back to both of you, do you believe our country, the United States of America, is better off now than we were 3 weeks ago?
Again, I don't want to leave the impression here as a representative of the administration, nor does the administration, that we did not think that Turkey's coming across the border on the 8th, 9th of October was anything other than a tragic disaster for the situation in northeast Syria. That is why this administration, beginning with the President, immediately wrote a letter to President Erdogan, passing on our leader of the SDF, General Mazloum's request for a ceasefire and political talks. That is why the President then had a conversation with, or he passed on a message to President Erdogan that I delivered a couple of days later, and then dispatched the Vice President, the National Security Advisor, and the Secretary of State all out to, I won't say impose, but to demand a ceasefire, along with very strong sanctions that we immediately rolled out right after the incursion began. So yeah, this was a bad thing, and we took very energetic efforts to try to contain it, and to the extent we can, roll it back.
Sir, with all due respect, I concur it was a disaster, but it's hard to say it was an unanticipated disaster. Would you say so?
It was always, as the President said, long-planned Turkish incursion. The Turks always had that option. We did not have a military option. We took the decision not to have a military option, and I absolutely think that was the correct decision. But we did have a policy decision to use every means short of the military to deter the Turks, to convince the Turks not to come in. And we thought that we had succeeded. We had done a deal with them where we were doing joint patrols, joint aviation missions over the Northeast. We believe and we know that met their security concerns. So they then took a decision to come in on their own.
So you're testifying that we used every tool in our toolbox to the best of our abilities to prevent what we're seeing happen right now?
Everyone but military, and also we did not succeed.
Okay. My last question is relative to Turkey's endgame under Erdogan. I'd love both of your perspectives on what you believe their long-term strategy is in the region, especially absent our participation.
In Syria, it is to ensure, and it's relatively congruent to use that word with ours, other than the problem with the Northeast, it is basically to put pressure on the Assad regime, because Turkey sees the Assad regime as a threat to them, to limit to the extent they can Russia's influence, and to deter Iran operating to the south of Turkey. So these are all, as I said, congruent with our interests.
More broadly, Congressman, Turkey's goals are to play a leadership role in the region and to ensure Turkish security, including in particular through the comprehensive defeat of the PKK.
All right, my time is up and I yield back. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman for yielding back.